Well, I've actually directed the Radicalisation of Bradley Manning twice. The first time it was a completely new play. In fact, it was a play in development. So the writer, Tim Price, was in the room throughout and often responding to things that the actors were doing. The second time we restaged it for Edinburgh, and at that point the script was much more set. So we did still make some tweaks and changes with Tim, but basically we were exploring the text as it was written on the page. One of the big things with this play in particular that's always a challenge with actors is thinking about the story, because the text moves backwards and forwards in time. It's important for the actors to think, well, what's the actual sequence of events? So in rehearsing it, we'll often take the scenes out of the order that they're in the book and look at them in the order that they must have taken place in life, and explore it that way and see what the journeys of the characters, particularly Bradley's character, are through that story as a whole. One of the other decisions that we made in general with the piece is that we would have the actors playing lots of different characters, and that at different points all of the actors would get to play Bradley Manning. And that was based on one of the original things that had happened on the internet when different people had sort of taken on Bradley Manning's persona and stood up for him. And so all of the actors at different points play that part as well as playing lots of other parts. And again, that's a big challenge for actors, because rather than going through and seeing just their story, just the story of the character that they're playing, they've got to move about. They might be playing Bradley in one scene and Bradley's father in another scene. So again, working through the script and looking at the sequence of the story and seeing at what happens to who, when, and particularly what are the changes that happen to Bradley and why do those changes happen, became very important. I think that you have a responsibility probably as the director of the play the first time to work quite closely with the writer to work out, how did they imagine it, what were they hoping for. But again, that doesn't mean that you're stuck doing just the instructions of the writer. It's your job and the actor's job to come up with possibilities that the writer might never have dreamed of, but that feel right for that text. With this particular play, the idea to do a play about Bradley Manning came from Tim Price, the writer, knowing that Bradley had spent his teenage years in Wales and in Haverfordwest. But as we started to think about where we should do it and what the process should be, it started to feel that the play would gain from rehearsing it in the school and from initially presenting it in the school. And also we knew that a number of Bradley's family still lived in that area, and we wanted to, in a way, create a dialogue with them and be open to them about the fact that we were developing a piece on this story.
Hackers should be judged on their hacking, not on anything else like education, race, sexuality. And this is my favorite. You can create beauty on a computer.
So Radicalisation of Bradley Manning is intrinsically about the digital world, and it's about a young man who in a way developed a different identity, a different sense of himself in the digital world. And so it felt to me as director that we needed to find a way to embody that digital world in the performances of the play. So we came up with the idea that every single performance of the play would also be live cast on the web, and it would be live cast in a way that people could also interact and chat online about the scenes as they were being performed. So the play had that same kind of double identity in a way that Bradley himself had, of living on the web as well as living in real space. And that also allowed audiences to have two different experiences, and lots of audiences watched it online, lots watched it in theatre space, but actually an awful lot watched it in both.
I didn't like all the people watching and not doing anything. If I'd seen someone innocent being punished for something they didn't do, well, I'd do something about it.
I think what I would never do with a play is add our own words to it unless the writer had specifically said that we should do that. In this play, the writer actually says in the stage directions that some of the things that we did in the original production should be there. For example, all of the actors sometimes playing Bradley. But I could imagine a production in which that wasn't the choice of the director, in which they said, well, actually, I want to do a more traditional version of this and not have different actors playing this character at different times. And I think that would be, now that the play's been done in the way that the playwright imagined, I think it would be fine to try it in other ways. I decided not only to live cast every version on the web, but also to stage the entire production in the round. So the audiences were on all four sides, which meant that when you're live casting, there's no obvious place to put the cameras. So if you're doing something on a traditional end stage, you've just got the audience sitting on one side and the performance in front of them. You can put cameras where the audience are, and you can quite easily show a picture of what's on stage on the web. When you're performing in the round and you've got audiences on all sides, wherever you put the camera, the actors are going to move out of view, and also there's going to be bunches of time when you've got the audience in view rather than the actors. So it was quite a difficult thing to sort out. We also couldn't have camera people, because if you had a camera person on a camera, they were going to get in the way of some of the audience, because the audience were all around the stage. So none of the usual things that you could do with live casting were possible to live cast this piece. So what we did instead was that we mounted surveillance cameras on four corners of the stage, high up, so above the audience, but pointing onto the stage. So the surveillance cameras were able to see, none of the cameras could see all of the action, but between the four cameras, they could see all of the action. And then, rather than having a cameraman, we had a live editor who was watching all of those feeds and would move between the different feeds of the cameras. So that's how we dealt with it technically. And then, as a director, having staged it, I then needed to work with the camera people to make sure that I hadn't staged it in ways that made it impossible for the cameras to catch the action. So what I did as a director actually was that I staged it for the theatre audience first, and then I made some adjustments for the cameras. But essentially, because of the choice that we'd used around the surveillance cameras in the four corners, most of the directing that I'd done for the theatre audience work, there were just a few adjustments that I needed to make, sometimes to make sure that we didn't lose certain elements of certain scenes. Working with the actors on the play, our starting premise was that for most of the scenes, all of the actors would always be on stage, and that we'd always think of them as a group, moving as a group, so they could be together or they could be spread out on the stage, but we were looking at the movement of the group as a whole. So in a more traditional theatre piece, you might focus on the actors who've got the main lines and just see what movements seem to naturally occur around those lines. But we were, in a way, creating a kind of mood picture always with the movement of the actors, where there might be one or two characters that were the lead elements of a scene, but everybody else would also be responding and be part of the mood that was being created. So one of the scenes that's an example of that is a scene that took place in a diner, in a restaurant, between Bradley and his father. And his father only appears in this one scene. And it's a scene in which his father wants him to sign up to be a soldier. And Bradley wants to tell his father that he's gay.
Because I was wondering if you could help me pay my way through college.
And both of those motivations are going on in the scene. So again, in a more traditional setting, you might simply have set the table for them at the restaurant and looked at, what their interaction be, when might one of them stand up from the table and move away. But because we were looking more at an overall mood created through the physical experience, we started off with the fact that Bradley and his father were obviously feeling very distant in this scene. So we put the chairs that they were sitting at far corners of the stage area and had their conversation going on at a real distance from each other. And then the rest of the actors were all in the scene as waiters, and they were moving knives and forks, etc. But there were also no tables in the scene. So the actors were moving around as waiters. They were playing waiters, and then sometimes they were playing other people in the diner, in the restaurant, and they kept changing what they were playing, but they'd also be handing knives and forks and cups and plates to Bradley and his dad. And that was a sense of the world that they were in, the world that was moving around them while they were having this intense but very distant personal conversation. And as the scene progressed, for example, at one point, some money gets thrown from Bradley's dad towards Bradley, and it's just thrown in the middle of the floor, and Bradley has to go there and pick it up. And then when there's a really strong feeling around one of the characters, say around Bradley, at certain points, all of the other actors would move around that character as though they were sort of shadowing or mirroring his thoughts and showing that his emotions were particularly intense at this point.
You have to wait, but you're getting life experience and money in your pocket. And you get your degree, and you get the hell out of there with a degree and military credentials.
I could go to MIT.
You go where you want. For free.